Hi, and welcome to another lesson of the Excel for Absolute Beginners course. In this lesson, which is lesson 22, we are looking at built-in functions in Excel. So there are a lot of these functions, and if you have watched the previous lesson, you would understand how these functions are used. But in this particular lesson, we are exploring some of the common functions that you may be using in your day-to-day activities while using Excel. So these have been categorized into text functions, date and time functions, statistical functions, logical functions, math and trig functions. In fact, there are other categories as well that may be used in some form of specializations, and we are just going to focus on the common ones amongst these categories. To begin with the text functions, I have this spreadsheet to help us out with some of the common functions that we can apply to text in Excel. So the first one we are looking at is trim function, and the trim function basically allows you to trim or delete empty spaces before or after any word. All right, so for instance, here we have an example, and the name Obed has some spaces before it. So as you can see from the formula bar, there is some spaces, and when you compare it to this one, you see that the spaces are not even here. So if we want to create a such that all those spaces here, we don't want the space before Obed, before one here, we don't want all those spaces. So what we can do is apply the function equal to trim, then pass it the cell reference. This particular cell is what we are looking for. Close up this, then hit enter. So as you can see now, there is no space before Obed, unlike before. And we can use the fill handler to apply this to the other text as well. And as you can see, now we have all of them without the spaces. So that is the rule of the trim function. Concatenate function enables us to combine or join text. All right, so here we are going to join these two texts into a full name column. So basically, we'll go ahead and say equal to concatenate. Then you pass in the reference cell. So we want this, then comma, that. Go ahead and click enter, and it combines them, but unfortunately there is no space between them, and we know that mostly when you want to write full names, you want to leave some space between them. So if we want to achieve that, we can still achieve that with our concatenate function, but by modifying it a bit. We have some empty string in between them. So let's go ahead and do that. This will be a, comma, then you pass your quotation marks. Then you pass your quotation marks and leave an empty space. Close the quotation mark. That is telling Excel that there is an empty space here. Then you bring your comma, then you go ahead and select the final one. So if I hit enter, you see that this time around I have some space between it. And the way I achieved that was to tell Excel that there should be some space there. So if it wasn't a space rather, but I wanted, say, a comma, what I would have done is to go in there and still create that kind of the quotation marks, but in between the quotation marks this time around I'm not going to use the empty space, rather I'm going to use the comma if that is what I'm interested in, and hit enter. So the names have been separated by a comma. So that is how to use concatenate to join text in Excel. The left and right function in Excel helps us output a certain number of characters from the left of the text that we pass. So now this is the name Obed. If we pass it into the left function, the first thing we will need to pass is the text, or pass in the reference to the text. This text, if I want the first two letters in my name, then I go ahead and say 2. So let's assume you are creating some form of serial number, and for each name that you have on your list, you want to pick the first two names or letters to formulate your serial number. Then you can use this function left to create that. If I hit enter, you realize that it has given us the first two letters, which is OB. If it is rather the last two letters that I want, then I can pass the right instead of the left. Then say, okay, this very test, I want the last two digits, so 2. Then it gives you the last 2. And you don't have to restrict yourself to 2. You can equally change it to any number. So if I say 1, then it's going to give me just the last to the right. That is if you are using the right function. And if you are using left, it will give you that to the left. So let's say 3, change this to 3 and see what it gives us. It gives us the first 3 letters to the left. So that is how we use left and right. Then the len function in Excel gives us the length of the text that we pass it. So for instance, if I go ahead and say equal to len, then pass this cell reference to it, it's going to give me how long or the total number of characters in the name. So that is 4. Let's do same for this other name, and you see this is 7. Okay, so these are some of the common text functions that you'll be using in Excel. Now let's go to date and time functions in Excel. With a date function, it helps us put together the year, the month, and the day to formulate a date. All right. So if your text has columns where we have year, month, day, and you want to generate one column that will put everything together as year, then you can go ahead and use the function date. And this is how it goes. The function date will take in the arguments, the year, the month, the day. So go ahead and pass the reference to it. You can equally type it yourself, but I prefer using the references. Then once you are done, click enter. So this has generated a date for us, and you can apply it to any kind of date. In the same vein, we can do for time. The time function requires us to pass the hour, the minute, and the second to it. So pass the hour, the minutes, and the second to it. Then hit enter. This gives us the date, the time that is given. All right, then we have a function that can help us generate today's date. So if you are creating a spreadsheet, that should always pick the day in which the person is working on the spreadsheet, then that is today's date. So you go ahead and use the today function. If you pass, today takes no argument, so you just have to write equal to today, then hit enter with your bracket, and it gives you today's date. So this is exactly today's date, and this is some of the common date and time functions that you encounter. Now too, I've already spoken about it in an earlier video, and I said it also doesn't take in any argument, but it gives you the date and time for this current period or this very moment that you are doing it, the date and time. So these are the date and time functions that comes in handy when you need them. Now let's look at some statistical functions that may also come in handy. And the common ones: min, max, average, count, where min is minimum, max is maximum, average is the normal average we know. And in my case, I've added sum and product to illustrate something for us all to see. So product basically helps us. Product is a function in Excel, and earlier on when we started talking about formulas, I mentioned that there are better ways to achieve those examples that I was showing you. So instead of doing the multiplication by yourself, you could pass in the function product, and it's going to do the calculation for you. So what we are interested in here, before I get to what we are interested in here, is our total score should be the credit hours multiplied by the score that the person obtained. So that is what we want to achieve here, equal to product. Then we want to multiply the credit hours by the score. Sorry, the credit hours, comma, the score. Then hit enter. That calculates it for you. Use the fill handler to pull it down to copy it across. Now you've done the calculation for all of these. So that is how you use the product function. And for sum, we want the sum of the credit hours, we want the sum of the scores, we want the sum of the total scores. How do we achieve that? Equal to sum. Then you can pass each of them, or you can even drag it across to select the range. So anytime you see something like B2 is to B5, it tells you that start from B2 and all up to, so from this to that. So B2, B3, B4, B5. Every one of them included here. So that is what the ranges can help us do. Let's do same here. We can use the range to pick this. Then we can equally do same here. So sum, then pick the range here. We have gotten the sum for each of these. Now let's shift our focus to minimum, maximum, and average. So among these scores, among the scores that the students had, we want to determine which was his minimum score, which was his maximum score, and what was his average score. So for the minimum score, the function is min, then we pass the range. So let's just select the range of scores, and it tells us that his minimum score was 78. Let's do same for the maximum scores. For the maximum score, we have 92. Then what is his average score? His average score would be, so we go ahead and type in average equal to average, then select the range, and we get 84.25 as his maximum, his average score. Count will tell us the total number of subjects, or the total number of, depending on the cells or values that you pass through it. So we want to know how many subjects did this guy study. All right, so all we do is pass the range, and count is going to count it for us. So there were 4 subjects, average of 84.25, maximum of 92, and minimum of 78. So those can also be done. Then we have logical functions. With logical functions, we'll make reference to and, or not. But I want us to also learn about these logical operators, just as we are talking about logic in Excel. And that can come in handy whenever we need to do some formulas or operations on our data in Excel. So with an equal to sign, we can check if 2 values or multiple values are equal. So in this our case, we are using score 1 and score 2 to check whether they are equal or not. And if you apply this operator, it's going to give you a true or false answer. So if it is equal to, then it's going to tell you true. If it is not, then false. And the same applies to the others. The result you are going to get will always be either true or false. So for instance, this is G2 and H2. We want to see if G2 is equal to A2. So for your formula, always begin with an equal to. Then we type G2, is G2 equal to H2? So even though in normal mathematics you can't have an expression like equal to G2 equal to H2, this is acceptable in Excel because the first equal to just tells Excel that you are about to write a formula. Then you go ahead and say G2 is equal to H2. This is asking Excel, is G2 equal to H2? Click enter and says no, that isn't true because this is 85, this is 56. Assuming we decide to change this to 85, and you see that it automatically changes to true because now the G2 is equal to H2. So let's change this back to what it was. We have our false here. Let's then check if G2 is less than H2. So we'll go ahead and say G2 less than H2. Hit enter, that's also false. Is G2 greater than H2? G2 greater than H2. That is true. Then this symbol is not equal to. So we are asking, is G2 not equal to H2? Hit, and that is true. Then G2 greater or equal to H2. So the question here is G2 greater or equal to H2? Hit enter, that is true. Then finally we are looking at, is G2 less than or equal to H2? And that is false. So depending on the values you have, you can always use any of these operators to check what you want. But the logical functions and, or, and not, let's see how we can use them. Assuming now I want to see if this option where I check the equal to, then this option where I check the less than, I want to see if both of them are true. Okay, so A and B, are they true? How am I going to go about it? So with logical operators, anytime you apply an AND operator on something or on any expression, we expect a true or false answer, and it is only going to be true when both sides are true. If one of them is false, it's going to return false. So for instance, with this particular one, we can go ahead and say equal to then our AND function, then we'll pass this column and this to it. So obviously both of them are false, so it's going to return false. If however we decide to change, since we know that C3 and D3 are true, if we decide to change this to C3 and D3, since we know they are true, it's supposed to return true. But if one of them is true but the other is false, assuming we change this to B3, which is false, then it's going to give us false. So that is how the AND operator works. Anytime you check for AND, we expect that both of them are true before it returns true. The OR is more like the opposite of AND, where not necessarily opposites, but with OR, OR will return true if at least one of them is true. It will only return false when neither of them is true. So let's go through it and see. So if we pass equal to OR, then pass this comma this, it is going to tell us that this is false because both were false. But if one of them at least is true, so let's change B3 to C3, then it's going to tell us that it is true. Okay, so or this is asking false or true. So anytime one of them is true, it's going to return true. Then not is used to negate any one of them. So if I do equal to not, then I pass any one of these. The true will now tell me that it's for it is. So I pass false, so it will tell me that it is true. If I decide to pass a true to the not, then the outcome will be a false. So these are some of the logical functions and operators that you may be using in Excel. Now let's look at some mathematical and trig functions, even though we don't do much on the trig functions. But there are a lot of them, and right after this, I'll show you exactly how to access all the other functions that are available. So with absolute, that's ABS, it gives us the absolute value of any figure that we have in there. And basically what it tells us, it does is that it gives us a positive value of the number. So for instance, if we pass absolute value of this particular cell, it's giving us 25 because the value was negative 25, but the absolute value, that is a positive value of this, is 25. Then we have the sign function. The sign function basically tells us whether it is negative or positive. So if it is positive, it gives us a result of +1. If it is negative, it gives us a result of -1. So if I go ahead and use the sign on this cell is going to return 1. Okay, that's +1. Then if I apply this to the next cell, then it's giving me -1, telling me that the sign of the value here is a negative. Then we have this other function for square root. So if I want to find the square root of 81, all I've got to do is pass that value to the square root function and it gives me the square root of 81. I can also apply it to others and get the square root as well. Then the last one we want to look at is modulus. Modulus basically retains the remainder from a division. So if we divide 57 by 2, what do we get? What is the remainder? We go ahead and do this by saying mod, then we pass it the number, then the divisor, okay? Then hit enter to get your value. So this is remainder 1. 57 divided by 2 will give you a remainder of 1. So these are common functions that you use, but let me also show you how to access all the other functions available to you in Excel. If you want the functions and formulas, you go to formulas here. Then to use any of the functions, so any of the functions we've talked about, actually you can find it here. Click on insert function, and the shortcut they are showing you is shift F3. So click on insert function, and as you can see, we have a lot of functions here. These are the recently used functions, but if you want all of them, then you can see as many functions as possible in here. And there are the categories as well. So there's financial category, date and time, math and Trig, stats, lookup and reference, database test, and we've taken a look at the most common ones that you may need. So here you go. This brings us to the end of the basic introduction to Excel, or the introduction to Excel, or Excel for beginners course. And in the next course, we are going to look at more intermediary things like how to combine some of these functions and formulas into very complex formulas and use them anytime that we want. So I hope to see you in the next course. If you enjoyed this course, do want to check out for the next course to get a better view of Excel and use it proficiently. And also, if you are yet to watch the previous lessons, do want to watch them so that you get a better understanding, good foundation before you move on to the intermediary course when that is launched. Thank you and see you in the next course. Bye bye.